I have been at the UNC Chapel Hill since 2006. My lab is primarily working on the organic materials. We go after different applications. Chemistry has been the foundation to all the things we do because with the chemistry, we actually know how to make things happen, make different materials, tailor the structures and the chemical structures and physical properties, and that will be hopefully making the better materials for better device performance, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's so cool. And then how
Yeah.
did you get interested in research in the first place?
That's a really good question. I did quite a bit of the undergraduate research when I was in the college. I think back in the days that my college required us to spend 5 years to finish. The very last year five, we basically did not take any classes. So research became the only thing you do in the lab, and that was mandatory. So it's not like something you can opt out. And that's where I got into research. It was very interesting, and to the point that I was willing to spend overnight to run a reaction because I need to get data for the kinetics. So if you learn the high school chemistry and you possibly understand a little bit about the so-called thermodynamics and the kinetics, right? If you try to look at the reaction rate, let's say, over the span of 18 hours, then you basically would not be able to sleep for that 18 hours because you have to track reaction. So that's how I got very excited on that. So after that, I thought, oh boy, I didn't really want to go to workforce right away. And so I applied for graduate school, came to Chicago, did my PhD there. But, like it was very interesting in the beginning. But then after 2 years, you were like, yeah, you know what, research is so difficult. It may not be for me. And I later on realized it was pretty common for all grad students because after 2 years, your initial let's say, a passion about research, if possible, will go down to the bottom because nothing worked. Why the heck I'm even in here, right? So, but once you finally got your project to work and you're seeing the positive results, your confidence will pick up again. And by the time I was about to graduate and 5 years, for a PhD, then my advisor was saying that, well, if you don't know what you want to do, you may want to do a postdoc because that's where you can actually think about what you really want to do for your career. So during the postdoc, when I was at Stanford, I was in chemical engineering. I learned a lot of how to make devices, which was good because in the Chicago, I was mainly focusing on developing materials. So using chemistry, design things, but I never knew how to make devices. So when I got to Stanford, I really understand that, well, looks like these materials can be really useful, but unless you put them into device setting, otherwise you wouldn't even know the properties, right? So long story short that I did apply for industry jobs and academic jobs. Believe it or not, academic job actually opened the door for me rather than industry. So I came to UNC and everything became the history afterwards. So to your point of why I'm interested in the research, I think my undergrad research really had a huge impact on me. That's why I went to the grad school in the first place. Without the grad school, I possibly won't be able to form my mind about what I want to do next. But having said all this, that I always tell my own students that doing research, you don't have to be in the academic research lab. You can do that in the company. It's more applied. You could be doing that in the government labs as well, right? So we have a lot of these federal government supported national labs. Then you can do a lot of research in there as well. So I think overall, research doesn't really limit to the stuff you do in the universities, and there are possibly even more research going on in the industry and government labs as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mhm.
And then I know that you already kind of gave me a little introduction to your research, but could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Let me put it this way. So initially, like 20 years ago when I started at UNC, I possibly did not truly understand or appreciate the difference between the fundamental science versus engineering. But after so many years, I realized that people in the fundamental science, let's say basic science, chemistry, physics, maybe like math, all these things, we care about why things happen. So why? These are the things that we care the most because if you understand the fundamental, which we call the underlying mechanism about why things happen, you will be able to manipulate some of the process and ending up with some interesting different phenomenon or discovery that engineering people then will come along saying that, well, this is really nice. What I'm going to do is to try to turn your discovery or some of the fundamental principles into something device applied and such that that's going to benefit a human being in a very direct way. So I think that's a very different. But in the lab, I think that we often make devices, but these are meant to test their materials. And there's a whole group of people, engineers, that they will take our very simple, like say primitive or rudimentary devices into something like your cell phone. I mean, one example I always say, cite that will make you understand is, you possibly use a lot of the iPhone, like OLED TV, right? So this is just, one thing is we do is so-called OLED, which is organic light emitting diode. If you remember that Samsung and a lot of companies now releasing so-called foldable phone, right? So I have one in my hand, if you don't remember, right? So foldable. If you're just using inorganic semiconductor, that's brittle. You can't bend the glass, right? Very simple idea. Plastics, you can bend them many times, no problem. So that's precisely where our research can come in because we will be able to design the material such that it will be giving you better light emitting efficiency and at the same time give you bendability. So that's organic materials. And so that becoming a very good way to recruit the students as well, like yourself, maybe go down the road, because they actually see why we are working on this fundamental research. Of course, there's a huge gap between what we do and Samsung engineers, right? For example, or Apple engineers. But without us providing the material, understanding the fundamental principles, they will never be able to have anything to work on. So we are the bottom of the food chain. So that's one way you can put it.
Yeah, okay. That's so cool. I guess I kind of thought that like looking at phones was much more engineering. I never factored in like the chemistry research side.
It's everywhere. I mean, I graduate a lot of grad students, PhDs from my lab. I have maybe like 5 or 6 people. You would not even think that people with a chemistry PhD will be working with Intel, IBM, right? So like all these semiconductor companies. So the reason they need them because these people, like from my lab, and they understand the chemical process, right? So if you ever going to be more interested in the science aspect, like all these cell phones, everything, fundamentally it's all semiconductor based on the so-called lithography. If you talk about lithography, making the size like a 5 nanometers, it's all chemistry at the end of the day because you need you using light essentially to write these chips. That's what we call lithography.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then I know you just talked about your work with like these phones, but what were
Yeah.
some of your most significant findings or publications?
That's a very good question, actually, because I think someone was asking me the same question maybe a couple of days ago. I think that what's really interesting to us is that we're not expecting every day you will be discovering something new, something you will get Nobel Prize, or something is going to revolutionize, iPhone 20, let's put it this way. It's not going to happen every day, but I think that if you were able to make a small discovery in 1 year and maybe you take that and you further develop, which is going to grow into a bigger discovery, maybe 5 years or 10 years. We're not talking about day or month, okay? We're not engineers. So they can possibly do something much faster than we do. But if that happens, I think that thing is going to make your career, at least for that 10 years. So to your question is one thing we were very proud of is that in the first 10, 15 years, my time in the UNC, we were the one of the first people who actually develop a chemical design rationale for polymers for solar cells. But we did not make the record high efficiency solar cells, polymer based, but the record high efficiency polymer would be using materials that inherited some of our discoveries. I think that's important, right? So it's not like we will be able to claim the championship, but we knew that, the reason you have the championship because our earlier discovery that turned out into something even bigger than we thought it could be. So that's really make you happy.
Yeah, that's so cool. And then like what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced in research and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, that's also a very good question. So depending upon the stage in your career, right? So in the first 5 or 10 years, maybe my biggest concern is how would you possibly identify the outstanding challenge in your field? So I often ask, challenging my own students is that the biggest challenge in any given research field is not you cannot solve the problem. It's actually you don't even know where the problems are. If you were able to identify where the problems are, like biggest the outstanding issues are, then you need to dive into the literature, see what other people have done already. Then you can come up with some new ideas to, try and error in some cases too, right? So I think step number one, I think that you have to choose a research field that you have passion about. B will be like you have to identify the outstanding issues in your field, which is not easy to do. You feel, oh yeah, we all know like global climate change is a big deal. That's too big. You can't do anything with it. But if you say, oh yeah, that's because the weather pattern, that's because the precipitation, that's because wind, the cloud, all these things. You know the reasons. What do you have to care about? Then you come up with ways to solve them. So once you got step two, you identify the problem. When you try to solve them, most of the time you possibly try something that will never work, which is okay, right? So you need some perseverance. Then you try different things. So often I told my students is that, well, if everything works, you don't learn anything. Even a high school kid can make that happen. Things actually not working the way you want them to be, then you actually do the troubleshooting. In that process, you learn a lot. So let me go back to your question is that the biggest challenge is actually you don't know where you should put the efforts on. And I think that comes in two ways. One is that you don't know what the key issues in your field. You don't work on the big problems. B is that you possibly run out of ways to address that problem. That could be frustrating as well.
Yeah. Like in my AP research class at high school, my teacher's just always telling us to narrow down and like keep on getting more narrow.
I mean, people like your age or like in college student, you all coming, oh yeah, I'm gonna save the world. Yeah, we all wanna do that. But at the end of the day, that you have to down to something concrete you can actually manage it to work on. You don't have 1,000 people working with you. You only have one person or two, right? So as long as everybody is thinking about same way and making small progress collectively, that's a lot of progress. Coming back to your question, I think the other challenge is about resource allocation because, like I said, I have maybe 10, 15 people in my lab. I have some questions I really care about, and there are some questions that may be secondary. So I have to reallocate the personnel, financial to the questions that, in my opinion, will be more important than other ones, right? So this getting the details now. So depending upon which aspect of research you talk about, there are different challenges as well.
Yeah. And then were there any like pivotal moments in your research career that made you change topics or want to pursue a certain topic?
That's a good question too. So I think one thing that's really interesting, actually happening all the time in academia, is that what really makes people excited is actually unexpected discoveries. So you set a path to that goal. During the process, you see something very interesting, weird. But a lot of engineers might be saying, yeah, you know what, forget it. We are going to the other side, so we don't care about these things. But if you have a curious mind, if you are prepared, you take a look and say, you know what, this is interesting. I'm going to spend some time to figure out why that's happening. If that turns out to be something very surprising, whether it's big or small, and you have a strong sense of fulfillment because you discover something that nobody knew in the past. You can claim the full credit. It's not about money. It's not about publishing another science or nature paper whatsoever. It's about you seeing something that nobody knew, and you actually the first one who came to understand. And that's really fulfilling in many ways.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And then like where do you see your research field expanding to? So I know that there's like these huge jumps in technology and AI, but
Yes.
like what are some interesting topics that you think can be further explored within the next maybe 5 to 10 years?
That's a great question too. I think that typically academic researchers' career is maybe like somewhere between 30 to 40 years, right? So assuming that you're starting your lab when you are 30 years old, which happened to me, and then assuming that you are healthy enough to work until 70, we're talking about 40 years. So in the 40 years time span, if you actually, it will be interesting for you to look at somebody very visible, like say past Nobel laureate, right? So then if that person already 70, then you take a look at how that person research changed over the time, which is you can easily tell. Usually you will see that in the past, you possibly seeing somebody who would be staying in his or her given field for like entire career, which happens a lot. But these days, I think that most of the successful researchers possibly need to actually really have to change the field. May not be huge difference. I'm not saying that I'm going to go from chemist to becoming a mathematician. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that within your given discipline, you possibly still have to move from one direction to the other. Maybe this year you're going to make a small leap, but the 5 years later, the cumulative, you're actually going to be very much different from what your original research was. So give you one good analogy is that you were digging a gold mine. You're digging for 5 years. Most likely gold will be gone, right? The remaining one is possibly not even worth your efforts. Then you say, you know what? I'm going to try to spend the efforts to look at where other gold mines are. So you take the time, in maybe 4 years, 5 years, you find that, hey, oh yeah, you know what? This is actually a big area nobody ever did. So now you went there, you dig a gold mine, which is very happy. So this is the way that you can continue to substantiate your curiosity and make you feel like this is the only reason you get up early in the morning, try to get something, because you're excited. I mean, I possibly work like 60, 70 hours a week, but I don't feel so much exhausted because it's so interesting. And you're always exploring something new. Otherwise, what's the point of having life, in a sense?
Yeah, okay. That's really insightful. And then moving on to questions about high schoolers, like how did you find your passion for research and how would you like suggest a high schooler try to find their own passions in research?
I think that's a good question too, because I have two boys. One just went to college a couple months ago. The other one is sophomore in the high school. I think the high school, in many ways, is very much like a college because you have 4 years. You can choose any subject you like. In my own situation, I just like the chemistry from many, many years ago when I was 15, so a long time ago, back in the high school, maybe even middle school. And so that always stayed with me. So even though possibly at some point in my life, I was thinking about going to different career because maybe the computer science is going to make me more money. That could be the case. Maybe I should go to something more business, which is going to make me more money too. But I would say that if you ask every single person who is a professor now, and then everybody's answer will be different. So in my own situation, that there are situations that I could have changed a different career, but that didn't happen for a variety of reasons. But once you stay in the field, then you becoming more interesting. Back to your question, I think in the high school, I think it's a good time for you to explore different disciplines. Not necessarily like a STEM field. It could be some arts as well if you are really interested, passionate about. But unfortunately, a lot of people just fell in love with games, right? Doing other things. I get that too. My boys play games a lot as well. But on the other side, I think that if you are cognizant, right? So let's say cognitive about what you try to do. And in the future, I think that exploring different things in the high school, not follow your heart. I would say that if you don't even know what you want to do in the future, I think that the first thing I would recommend is, you know what, go to some interesting club, maybe chemistry, physics, biology, maybe engineering, see what other people do because other people, the passion may ignite your own passion you were not aware before you joined them. And so that's another recommendation. Nothing can be even worse compared with you lying on bed and playing games, right? And so I would
Yeah.
recommend you go out and play some soccer or do some club sports, and that's also good too, right? So I think ask any person, right? So any successful person in your mind they possibly say, oh, the reason I picked this career because in the high school I was dragged into some basketball team. I met a person who was really interested in the computer science. I got into the computers. I mean, for the high schoolers, I think if you already know what you like to do, spend time on it, focus on that, really make you realize you do have a passion on that. If you don't, that's okay, and you can try to talk with your friends and join some club and see what really makes you excited if you are excited and you will be willing to put the time onto the thing, I mean, that could be changing when you go to college also, as well. So I think high school plus college total is 8 years. I think when you go from, 14 years old or 15 to 21, 22, and that's where you can more or less firm your mind what career you try to pursue. High school is first half of this your sort of the career deciding journey and college possibly the other half. But having said all this, I said there are also, different opportunities when you grow, like older, I've seen people who came back to the medical school being, I remember my wife had a colleague and who she actually dropped out of the being a lawyer and pursue a medical career because when she was like 40 something. And then she just liked it. I mean, so she said, "Oh yeah, you know what? I really like to be a medical doctor. I already know what to do with the attorney. Already financially okay, and I don't mind to spend time." At the end of the day, that's really the thing that makes you feel like there's something that's meaningful to your life.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just for our final question today, like what
Yeah.
kind of other tips would you give to a high schooler who wants to go into research?
I think that. one of the things I feel like a lot of people feel research is so far away from you guys because usually people like myself in the grad school that do research, but it could be any small topic. And I think in the high school, the easiest way is possibly to join some club. If you do not have that opportunity, if you're living in an area where you have a local universities, and I think at least for us at UNC, we are obligated to offer research opportunities for high schoolers nearby. So often that they will be coming our lab and try some research as well. The other thing is that the common issue I see is that high schoolers initially very interested, they join the research lab, and very often they're being discouraged because things don't happen the way they want them to be. It's not like you're playing games, you can play again, 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 and you always go through level one, level two, level three, and in the lab, you could be just like, you don't even know what to do in level one because you don't have enough preparation. But do not be discouraged because very often the lab work is just repetitive too. You have to learn all these, skills before you actually can do anything meaningful different. I'm not expecting high school to solve outstanding issue. I think high school kids come to lab. Primary goal is to learn, get a sense about in an immersion way to understand what research is all about. Why people are interested, because now you have people who are senior than you. If they are actually very happy, even though they're not paid well, they're not making 100K a year, for example, but they're actually very happy every day. I mean, that happiness it's possibly something that not just simply measured by how much money you make. It's about you whether you enjoy what you're working on, right? So I think that's what I call ultimate happiness in a way. I think that yes, I would encourage you high school kids to go research if you have an opportunity. Coming back to your question is first one, high school has a club. Go join the club. Go make the connections with the local universities. And I think we all be willing to help out. And because we knew like we were able to plant some seeds with you guys and we'll be having the next batch of students going down the road. A lot of low-level manufacturing things will be done by the robotic stuff anyway. So we possibly need even more people to explore new things that we don't even know the answer to.
Yeah, that's great advice. Like, those are all the questions that I have for today. And thank you so much for meeting with me.